Kia ora, nau mai ki te whare. Welcome to the House, ko Louis Collins aho. This week, Parliament focused almost all of Tuesday and Wednesday on one item of business, a very controversial surprise bill. Here's Phil Smith to explain.
Kia ora, ko Phil Smith aho. When the initial plan for the parliamentary week this week was promulgated by the government, the plan was to pass legislation under urgency, all week. There was an oddity though. The list of legislation indicated for debate didn't seem long enough or controversial enough to sustain the 25 hours of debate at least that a full week of urgency would include. The puzzle was solved on Tuesday when an extra, fresh bill was added to the list at the 11th hour. A bill that would be introduced under urgency and debated immediately through all stages with no referral to Select Committee or capacity for public feedback. This one.
I understand it is the intention of the government to introduce a bill.
Equal Pay Amendment Bill introduction.
The Equal Pay Amendment Bill is set down for first reading immediately.
The Equal Pay Amendment Bill returns the pay equity legislation back to something more like National's 2017 version, or possibly something a little tighter. Claimant access had been eased by Labour in 2020 with National support, but now the pendulum has returned. The government has said it will abide by equity claims already decided, but the 33 claims currently underway will be thrown out and will need to begin again, if they qualify under new, stricter conditions. Here's the Minister in charge, Brooke van Velden.
The bill will apply to existing unresolved claims and to review clauses in existing settlements. Existing pay equity claims will be discontinued and they will need to be raised under the amended legislation, whether they have been raised with the employer or filed at the authority and are not yet determined. The government is doing this because we consider it's important that everyone is on the same playing field from the start.
The new framework includes restricting allowable role comparisons. You can imagine the opposition were vexed.
How absolutely shameful. And why is not every woman on that side of the House hanging their head in shame?
This is a war on women.
This will come with the women of New Zealand standing up and saying, we do not accept a government that puts us second.
And here's Camilla Bellich with the opposition take on why.
This bill makes pay equity claims for low-paid workers much harder. It takes the threshold to 70%. It means that you can't bring a claim for 10 years. It gives employers the entire right to decide a comparator and whether a claim is meritorious. It's retrospective. It gets rid of existing pay equity settlements. It is a blow to every working, low-paid woman in New Zealand that works in a female-dominated role.
Brooke van Velden had a very different description of many of those same points.
A more robust process for raising a claim, where claims need to have merit to progress. Further tools for employers to ensure that claims are appropriately scoped. Additional clarity and guidance on how to choose an appropriate comparator and on comparison methodology. Changes to enable employers to meet their pay equity obligations in a manner that is sustainable.
One of the themes that returned regularly through debate on this bill was whether or not its sudden arrival and urgent dispatch is primarily timed for the budget, which is 2 weeks away, and whether these changes are aimed to improve the government's books in consideration of possible future financial liabilities. National MPs have poo-pooed that idea. Louise Upston.
This piece of legislation is not about saving money.
Opposition MPs, you might have guessed, felt differently. Jan Tanetti.
To grasp desperately to make their budget balance. And so what are they doing? They are throwing women under the bus.
This bill took up almost 2 entire days in the House before it was eventually passed, and that's with the hours extended under urgency. Even during question time, it was the main topic of inquiry. Again, the financial motive was a core question. On Thursday, the Minister of Finance was quite explicit about financial savings as a motivation, but she also gave other reasons. Here is an interaction with Labour's Barbara Edmonds on Wednesday.
Because what we found, Mr Speaker, was that claims were being able to be progressed across a range of issues that went beyond the intended scope as it related to discrimination on the basis of sex.
What claims
were outside the scope of the legislation that required the legislation to now change urgently before her budget.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's long been the practice of this House that we won't make legal judgments about which claims may or may not be successful in future.
You just said there were.
As commentators have noted, ACT and National have had slightly different takes on this question. ACT Minister Brooke van Velden was asked about it during the committee stage.
And while there have been comments made about potential savings, what I can say is that there are significant reductions in cost to government, but I can't go into budget.
Thanks, Phil. On Wednesday evening, after hours and hours of debating that Equal Pay Amendment Bill, the House turned its attention to a different item of business, in the form of a valedictory statement. In his maiden speech way back in 2002, Labour's David Parker said he felt like Harry Potter arriving at Hogwarts. On Monday next week, Parker is leaving Parliament after 22 years and probably again feels the same way that Potter did when he left Hogwarts.
I was elected for Labour on 27 July 2002 when I won the Otago seat. Campaigner extraordinaire Pete Hodgson trained me when I chaired his electorate committee. Parker in Parliament. I wore a purple checked shirt in every photo and every day. People said I'd stolen a tablecloth from a greasy spoon, a fashion crime. It was a winter election. I hired a banner from the owner of the ODT, Sir Julian Smith, but I'm staunch National. You're a media mogul and this is a purely commercial deal. We agreed a fee. Each Saturday, a giant Vote Labour Parker banner flew over the winter sports grounds and buzzed central Otago towns and ski fields. Julian donated his fee. With snow on the ground, the ski fields were booming. I loved skiing and handed out my brochures as people came off toes. They came to me. I didn't have to move. Close to an upset, a steady stream of ministers came creating media opportunities. We won by just over 600 votes. My life and my family's changed that night. It has been a privilege to be elected to be representing my fellow countrywomen and men, and the 23 years since, I've given it my all.
The Labour journeyman has served in 2 Labour governments and 2 Labour oppositions during his time at Parliament, holding cabinet portfolios in both the Clark and Ardern administrations.
My first break in Parliament came from Corngate, or Seeds of Distrust. The Select Committee inquiry unanimously found no evidence of interference or cover-up by any minister, including the PM. She quite liked that. Helen, Michael, Winston and Richard Prebble dominated the House. Jeanette Fitzsimons and Rod Donald were establishing the Green brand. An exceptionally good coalition government. 9 surpluses, strong growth, low unemployment and a list of achievements longer than my arm. The Right Honourable Helen Clark was a fantastic PM for 3 full terms. So much has endured. She, Sir Michael Cullen and Heather Simpson stand tall as giants. It's been a busy time in Parliament. I was a deputy leader under David Cunliffe, which I enjoyed. For 6 weeks, I was acting leader of the party. Enormous privileges. We're here to improve New Zealand. Obviously, being in Cabinet helps. I was a minister in Helen Clark's 5th Labour government and the 6th led by Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins. We owe the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern an enormous debt of gratitude and respect for her leadership. Jacinda's astoundingly clear and kind communication carried the nation. As she did after Christchurch massacre, this one always gets a tickle in my throat, when she said, "They are us. They are us," and showed respect by wearing a headscarf. That's leadership I'll remember.
Throughout all the roles and responsibilities he's held, Parker has been focused on 3 things.
A prosperous egalitarian economy, the protection of civil liberties and the rule of law, and good environmental outcomes.
As is typical in a valedictory statement, Parker used some of his time to go over some of the achievements on his resume.
I was Listener's Environmentalist of the Year in 2008 for my work establishing the emissions trading scheme and the 90% renewable electricity target, which remain cornerstones of New Zealand's efforts to reduce emissions. We got there with votes from Greens and New Zealand First, who both have a good voting record on these issues. Now, my wider work on upholding civil liberties included on the New Zealand Bill of Rights Declarations of Inconsistency Amendment, and this created a pathway for Parliament and the Executive to respond to declarations from the senior courts while maintaining parliamentary sovereignty. In 2017, I charted a pathway into the important CPTPP trade agreement, updating our screening regime for inward investment to include residential land. Kiwis should not be outbid by richer people from overseas and be tenants in our own country. This is as true of the most beautiful lakeside property and the most modest urban home, which is another Kiwi's dream. Leveraged landlords get capital subsidies year after year. Grant Robertson and I fixed this, but sadly it was reversed. Maybe we went a little bit far, but we were right.
Also common in valedictory statements is the practice of having one last lash at promoting your pet policy. For Parker, this is tax reform.
The revenue neutral tax which I proposed is sometimes described as a wealth tax, but it's better seen as a tax on income from capital. Think of it as an average rate of return of 4.5% taxed at a third. In fact, it's less because the family home and contents plus an additional $5 million of investments each, $10 million for a couple, were excluded. It's always been difficult to convince the other side on tax. At times I've found it surprisingly hard on my own side too.
The Labour stalwart also offered some wisdom about how he survived 2 decades of being an MP.
To do your job for long in this House, you've got to have fun. Question time is best when you're in a corner. Maurice Williamson, the tosser of the document. Jerry Brownlee in Brokeback Mountain. The Saudi sheep farm in the desert. Baxter poetry with Nicola Willis. And most recently, Claire Trevette and the cows. But it's not all fun. The exclusive brethren who don't vote hired private investigators to do the dirt on me, David Benson Pope and Peter Davis. Unfortunately for them, the PI forgot he was private and gave an interview spilling the beans. Weird. And a clip of me saying Jackie Dean says I hate farmers cut to I hate farmers and circulated on social media. But the worst stuff happens to our leaders. None of them deserve it. Thanks to all the people who run Parliament, a special call out to Grant Cleland in the library, to the judiciary and the Fourth Estate, the public servants, unions, businesses, farm leasers, NGOs, academic communities, the comms gurus, thank you. The artists of all genres who enrich us all, the scientists who also open up new frontiers, and my fellow MPs, the opposition is not the enemy. To Shane Jones, I love you, but we don't need more coal.
Perhaps a combination of his background in law and his egalitarian beliefs, Parker has a manner that has seen him being associated with the adjectives of meticulous and intelligent, but also sometimes boring or nerdy. Parker is definitely aware of this. In his speech, he acknowledged that his interest in the specialised details has sometimes led to him being called a wonk. But as he alluded to in his speech, there are certainly worse traits to have as an MP, and as a self-professed conviction politician, it's likely he wouldn't give that trait up to be more popular.
Aruna Williams recently surprised me by saying, "You're different." I asked, how? You don't need affirmation, and so you're happy to disagree. It can be a weakness too. Yet officials thrived on it. That's who I am, a conviction politician, clear in my values, my ideology, no communist, part capitalist, part socialist, class not race. And I'm 100% sure Labour's my place. I've fought many battles. I've stood on principle, I've won and I've lost. But I leave here knowing that on environment, civil liberties, and most precious of all, a prosperous egalitarian society, I've tried to move the dial. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
I te whakarongo koe ki te whare. You've been listening to The House, a programme made with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Mātua.